Hello everyone, our third and final video of the day. So, going back to the main components of what I expect to see within your narrative paper, we've talked about the introduction so far, and now I'm just going to spend a brief time talking through the body and conclusion because the introduction has a little bit more of a complex kind of format for this kind of writing, but the body is pretty basic and I think should be fun and easy for you guys to go through, and then the conclusion is just kind of brief. So we'll get to both of these within this final video. So the first thing I want to focus on here is looking at the components of the body paragraph. So remember in the initial video for today, we talked about the contrast between an essay and a short story. Remember that this is a composition course, and so you're working toward an essay, which means that you're not just entertaining us with a creative story, but since it's an essay, you're also analyzing that story. So the goals that I'm giving to you that you should have as a guide as you're polishing things are that you should be informing us, which means what is the bigger picture that you're analyzing, but you should also be entertaining, right? And those should definitely be the goals, not only as a broader framework for the essay, but within the body as well. So the main goal of the body should be to have a beginning, middle, and an end, right? You're telling a story that should have a clear structure and an arc. So traditionally this would be done within 3 paragraphs, right? You have the beginning as your first body, then the second one would be the middle, the last one would be the end, but sometimes I see this kind of, elaborated on a little bit. But the main point is that you don't need to tell every single moment from the story because you're only writing 3 to 4 pages. You need to choose those pieces that are going to track some sort of transition in your character and the person you're observing. You need to make sure that you're very deliberate in what is constituting the beginning, middle, and end. They shouldn't be too repetitive, right? Maybe they'll be jumping through time, through years of time. Maybe it's through minutes, but it should be very easy to transition them. And that's why I said here track time. It's up to you if you want to focus on one moment or if you want to give us a couple of different episodes, but you need to make sure that you are allowing for them to have coherence by helping us understand years have passed, seconds have passed, minutes have passed, we're in a new location, and things like that. And here you should also be including vivid imagery, right? For a creative writing course, we say show, don't tell at the center of your essay within the body. This should be a part of your mission as well, to help us imagine the story that you're telling, not through just analysis, but through painting a picture, right? So I reminded you guys here of the 5 senses. You might not need to include all of them, but depending on what the story is that you're telling, there should be some key moments where we know this is an important section of the story because you're really focusing very deliberately on sounds or on the taste of a dish or something like that. So these are things that you should really be keeping in mind for the body. How can you entertain us and inform us? How can you have a clear plot structure? How can you show us a time frame? And then be sure to paint a picture with vivid imagery. Then I thought, of course, I would do the same thing here with the body and talk about what it is that Smith is doing following our expectations for this kind of writing. So I've broken down Smith's essay into the beginning, middle, and end. And just very briefly, right, you should be able to kind of map out your story in this way. I'm not collecting an outline for you, but I highly recommend this so that you can see what your transitions are. So the beginning of Smith's story is the situation where the community aids the mother and the baby carriage, right? There's the crack in the sidewalk, and we see that there's a little bit of an accident. So the community comes together to help this mother. Then we go to the middle, again, a situation of community aid, this time with the old Chinese lady. In both situations, we see this sort of routine in which everyone from the city and from this particular street block comes to help the victim, and then quickly, after the situation has been resolved, goes off to their own individual lives, right? Then it seems like, oh, we're probably going to have a repetition of the same thing, right? But the ending is a little bit different. The night of Halloween, at the end of our story, the community is celebrating this particular holiday despite not just a simple accident like those first two, but a more complex tragedy that has occurred, right? And this leads into the really interesting kind of philosophical analysis that Smith provides for us of big city living and this kind of stigma attached to the people living in big cities about how they don't really care about each other. And she says, no, look at these events. We do care about each other, but we also understand how to carry on. So, my question for you guys is, can you map out your own story in this way? And as I mentioned, you should be able to. Very briefly tell us what are those events. And if you'll notice here, I've summarized them with actions, right? With verbs. And this is a good idea as you're framing your body to think about it as a series of actions, not just ideas, right? What actually happens at each moment? The community aids the mother, the community aids the woman, the community celebrates the holiday. You should be able to track your key moments in this way. So I said here, also notice at the beginning, middle, and end push us forward toward the bigger picture, which I just kind of summarized a moment ago. The ending of the story, after we've had these kind of more innocent community, gatherings, something that happens despite a tragedy, right, an attack in their community, is that she understands the importance of community, even in a place that might not seem for the rest of the country to have a lot of community within it. So, this sort of transitioning from beginning to middle to end actually very effectively and successfully leads us toward that bigger picture. And here we go, the bigger picture, the conclusion. Two things that I always recommend. You definitely should not be summarizing, which I probably should have put here on the PowerPoint. That standard kind of high school essay writing is now I'm just going to summarize everything I've said. You've already told us your story. You don't need to go back and summarize it. Now you need to be thinking back to what your thesis goal was, and remember in your thesis, you were setting up the event and the bigger picture. Here's where you very deliberately are expanding on what that thesis goal was in regard to the bigger picture. And I like to describe this as a transition from personal to universal. Now you're allowing your story to expand into something that connects with our experience as well. And so the line that I took from Smith's, broader conclusion is that she says, yes, we carry on after disaster and attack, but that's not all we do, right? And so this is the lesson here. It's not I anymore, like she began the essay. Now it's about we. She's connecting herself with a broader New York City society, and she's thinking about this idea of how, yes, people move quickly, people pass through tragedies and they go on, but they do have these moments of connection, and that's not something that should be discounted. So, as I said here, this is not a total surprise. We've had hints of this notion of city versus village throughout, and we've had a very effectively organized story that has led us to this bigger picture, right? So, this is definitely the kind of goal that you should have. So, just very quickly to recap the main points that we've talked about here and that we're going to be focusing on and utilizing in class. You should be focusing on thinking about a narrative for your paper that has an effective structure. And the three parts to include are your introduction with a complex thesis, the body, which contains the story, and the conclusion, which includes a bigger picture from personal to universal. So those are things that we're going to be working toward and identifying in class. I will see you there. Thank you.